Hi, everyone. I am Sean Markin. This is the Beyond the Orgasm podcast for Ayavana. And I am beyond excited today to be able to talk to Rachel Klechevsky. She is a clinician with the Audacity practice. And I will do an absolutely horrible job of introducing you because I'm so excited about this. We've talked many times and you're amazing, but I'd love you to sort of introduce yourself so I don't mess it up.
Sure. Yeah, so the name of my practice is called the Audacity to Heal. And I have a background in social work. I got my master's degree at NYU in 2011. And then I went straight into what I like to call affectionately sex school at Widener University, and got a clinical master's degree in human sexuality in 2015. And I've been practicing ever since. I had an initial focus in polyamory because there wasn't anybody who knew anything about it when I was in school. Although I did learn a lot from people like Ellie Sheff and Jerry Weitzman, among many other brilliant writers. And now I'm here today, a little over a decade later, just running my own practice.
That's incredible. Your backstory is really interesting. If you're open to it, I'd love to sort of delve into how you decided you wanted to go that direction, and what sort of pulled you and what got you excited about it.
Sure. I think a lot of this is my own ADHD chutzpah, so to speak. I was living in a very insulated community with very clear rules for boys and for girls, and the line for girls was just so narrow and blurry and hard for me to get. I couldn't understand it. But one thing I knew is that I couldn't compete, right? Competing didn't make sense because I was surrounded by people who had more resources, more opportunity, and, I wasn't part of that space. So I just found myself always on the outside of everything. And that made me a safe person for many of my peers to talk to share about their own experiences, to ask questions, which I found fascinating because we all had the same internet available, which was AOL that you had to get hours exactly to sign into. But I had gotten very good at doing research on the subject matter and, approaching all of my peers very carefully and compassionately because they weren't able to really speak to anybody else. The standards for them were don't have sex. You are not a sexual person. And that was really difficult. At the same time, being the person who was researching this meant that I must be having all that sex to my adolescent peers. And this led me into really difficult experiences with slut shaming and harassment from my peers. At the same time, they were also coming to me for advice. And for whatever reason, I never felt the desire to leverage that. And that kind of led me to recognize what I need to do with myself as a professional, that I don't need to get along with you to care about you. And to care about, your growth as a person, and to understand that at such a young age. I'm actually quite proud of myself for understanding that at a time where you could...
That's an incredible realization.
Yeah, where you could be really petty. And then at some point I was like, I am not going to be a therapist. I can't just do this. It's so obvious to everybody. And I had to fight what eventually was something that I was able to recognize, this is what you have to do. And then when I realized that there was an actual degree in sex therapy, I knew that's what I had to get done. I knew that this is what I needed to be. It made the most sense with everything that I was focused on for so many years. And it was a brilliant experience to learn it.
I had a similar experience. My dad is a therapist, and I have a very strong aversion to going into therapy, and yet I acted as therapist to many friends. So I understand. I never ultimately went into therapy, but I understand sort of the pull in two directions. It was interesting because you talked about you don't have to, you don't have to be friends to care about your growth. Tell me how you think about how your view on that therapeutic relationship has changed over time, and how you think about it now.
Yeah, like I had to evolve as a therapist myself, and that happened with my own personal evolution. I mean, I'm not a 25-year-old therapist anymore. At 25, I had a lot more energy to be radical and to fight everything. And like, I saw myself as a fighter. And as I got older, what I really wanted to be was actually more of an advocate, not a fighter. I didn't find that fighting was actually doing what I wanted it to do. I just wanted things to be better. And I just found things, I mean, looking in hindsight, got pretty much worse, like in many ways. Like some things got better, but some things got really bad. But what I did find is that in my origins, in my family of origin, the evolution that I saw in my much older parents, the way that they were able to kind of soften their own positions once a lot of the pressure of raising a family dissipated. And I found that to be really inspiring, actually. And I said, well, I don't have to wait until my stress is gone to be able to open my mind up to understanding an individual experience without taking it personally, right? So I actually have some people who are very blatantly anti-Semitic as clients, and also homophobic, queerphobic as clients, right? They have signs and symbols on their walls that indicate that to me, right? And none of that changes the fact that, hey, they still want to work on their marriages, and they still have deep anxiety, and they're struggling and they're depressed. And sometimes the dichotomy is fascinating. I have actual white supremacists with Nazi symbols in their background. They know I'm Jewish. They probably know that I'm queer because they definitely Googled me, and, they're coming to me with all of this vulnerability. And I see these relationships, these husbands and wives and these men are so tender and can be so sweet about their children. And I'm like, that is not right. 10 years ago, Rachel would not have accepted that was a possibility. And now I'm actually witnessing it. At the same time, this belief that liberalism is kindness, which is not true, has helped me witness people with very radical liberal values be quite narcissistic and abusive. And not to say that there aren't liberal people who are compassionate and loving and sweet and tender and gentle, or that there aren't white supremacists that aren't narcissistic and so on and so forth. It's just that human beings are complicated. And we can't just assume an entirety of a person based on one thing that you understand about them. And that has been liberating for me to not give a shit about what anybody thinks of me. And that's been awesome.
You're even more impressive now, because I don't know that I would be able to provide therapy, or at least good therapy, not that I'm a therapist, to an anti-Semite funding free.
That's fair. That's totally fair. A lot of people can't. And
superhero in comparison to at least me. So
it hurts sometimes, but that's why we go to therapy too.
Yes, yeah. What would you talked about people coming in and bringing all these things. What, and as a son of a therapist and someone who has benefited from therapy personally, my perspective on my role in the therapeutic relationship has changed. I'm curious about what you think people should bring, or how they should think about their role in that relationship.
As clients?
As clients, yeah.
I mean, I think that there needs to be a respect, a general respect for the humanness of your therapist, and that's really about it. And then you have to just trust the therapist to make sure that their boundaries are really strong and that they can make mistakes and come back. I supervise a lot of newer therapists, younger therapists. And something I say to them is like, screwing up is not permanent if you can own it and take accountability. And that's part of the therapy, right? Therapy is relational. And it's your role to model certain relational elements within the work. So to say, hey, I left in that moment and I didn't realize that you weren't being funny. And that was all on me. Like, that should not have happened. And I'm sorry. And sometimes they're like, no, it turns out that was actually quite funny. And I didn't really compute that until after you left. Like that happens most of the time, right? Because you can trust that that person, the therapist, is not actually laughing at you, but like at the way something was existing within you. And that is an honest expression. So as a client, showing up and saying, okay, I'm just going to share what I'm comfortable sharing now. And if there's more that I can share, later, I will allow that to happen. Just like, it's very hard to trust the process before you've ever been to therapy before. But this is part of what you need when you go to therapy, is developing that sense of trust. So coming in with like a tiny nugget of it and then seeing where that goes and being really like stand up for yourself in that way and say, hey, I didn't like that, if it didn't. And also therapists should be checking in. Is this okay for you? What would you like to change?
I found that for me, a lot when my friends talk about it, and when my father has told me about the situation, it often seems to me like the people that go to therapy sort of oftentimes, this is not 100%, are oftentimes feeling like they're checking the box. Okay, I've done this self-care routine, almost like it's a massage where you can sit there passively and sort of like absorb the zen or the amazingness of the therapist. But I found that what is really needed is that the therapeutic, that your 50 minutes a week or a day or however often you're going, really sort of necessitate you afterwards taking some of those actions that have been, sort of realized. Like if you have a hard decision to make, you could be in therapy talking about that wherever and not making progress, or you could sort of take action on that. And that part of your brain that only watching, are we being congruent? Are we being consistent with our beliefs and our thoughts? That's when progress hits me, at least for me. Like if I've been putting off something and I know that it's sort of a difficult thing, once I take action, it's almost like, even if that thing was hard, the progress that I've made internally is almost worth any price.
I think that every therapeutic approach is different. I look at the hesitation to take action. Being explicit is progress, right? Saying, hey, like, talk to me about the hesitation. Talk to me about what's getting in your way. What are the implications of that? What's the meaning of, where you are now to you? And I think that like it's the result isn't always the progress. At least in the way that I do the work, right? My work is not as concrete. The work is much more insightful oriented. And I find that my clients have a very peaceful relationship to the changes that they're making, which I find fascinating because I'm not like that. I'm a person that's like, once I've made the decision, I'm just going to like jump in and do it, because I feel like everything necessitated that change and I'm just going to go do it. And it's not always a peaceful shift, right? It's sometimes like I'm still struggling in this change, right? But it's a change that I know needs to happen. And many of my clients are going to go make a change and they say, you know what? It was hard, but it's also peaceful. Like it feel graceful to them. Some of the ones that maybe hesitated for a long time, but then went and did it. So I think that, there's a role for that hesitation. There's a role for that movement. And, progress is defined between the client and the therapist. It doesn't have to look like anything to anybody else.
You maintain your expertise in non-monogamy. And I think people, regardless of where you stand on the sort of sexual, I wouldn't call it a spectrum because that implies that it's binary. I think it's probably more like a steel. Let's not get into math, but it's bigger than sort of the spectrum. I know that some of the people, a lot of your clients are committed to that lifestyle. This is what it is. This is sort of their default choice, even if society is mostly skewed towards monogamy. This is their sort of default setting. And they are having to deal with sort of the big issues of life, kids, and those types of things. I would love for you to sort of paint a picture of like how a couple struggling with, say, having a child processes through that.
Well, I love this question because there's so much inside that question, right?
I'm great. Let's be real. I'm great at what I do.
It's excellent. The thing about this is that like when people enter a dynamic that's non-monogamous, right, they're usually coming from the assumptions of monogamy, right, that include, like this is what a relationship is. So they have to start asking a lot of questions about themselves, about what they want in their lives. And so non-monogamy can really throw a wrench into that experience, right? It can feel really scary when you start realizing that all of your assumptions about what the future could look like are going to be different. Could they be better? Yeah, sure, but it's different. And you've been quite attached to that reality, even if you didn't quite feel like it was for you in the first place, right?
It is the default setting, so it's hard to sort of, within a society that keeps reinforcing those norms, it is hard to do something that alternative.
Exactly. And so, when you have a couple that's been, open for a long time, or you have people who are, in a non-hierarchical dynamic, but, they want to have children, it kind of changes the structure, right? Like when you're in a monogamous dynamic, you have a kid, both of you are raising that kid and all the stuff that goes along with it. But when you're non-monogamous, who are you choosing to be, the partner that raises the kid? What is the role of each person in that child's life? How does this work? What happens when there's a problem? What happens if somebody wants to break up? What does that mean? Because the child is now an integral part of this dynamic, right? So like when a couple breaks up, ideally, they're going to share custody. They're going to learn how to, parent together. But what happens when a triad breaks up? Like, does the partner that is not biologically linked to that child or the partner that's not on the documents, like, do they still say a parent to that child? And we can never get all of that information in advance. But it is a fear, especially of that person who's about to like raise a child who may not be the one that's linked to that child. That's a huge fear that person has. And so you have to kind of like lean into the commitment. You have to play it out over and over again and understand that that commitment sticks around even when you break up. The commitment to say we are parents and this child has 3, 4, 7, 8 parents, doesn't matter however you're going to put that into context. Each parent is going to play a role anyway. It's not necessarily a gender role, but they're going to play a role. This parent is the one that's playful. This parent puts the kids to sleep. This parent is the one that had deep conversations with them and is really only there for the older ages. If I had the flexibility, I'm the older ages parent. And although I loved my kid when she was a super tiny baby, it's a lot more fun now, that she's older. Each person is there for different reasons, and it's also based on the relationship between the kid and the adult. And so that has to be a genuine and deep belief in the context of this dynamic, that every person's value in your lives is constant. It's just going to be shaped differently. It's going to show up differently, and we're going to get hurt. Right? Like it's gonna hurt, but we don't get into relationships assuming that we're not gonna hurt each other. That doesn't make sense. We have to trust each other that we're gonna come back and repair. And work toward softening the pain of that hurt with each other by taking accountability, by being curious, and so on and so forth. And that is true of all relationships. It's just a little bit more amplified in a non-monogamous setting because we don't have the law behind us. We don't have the protections of that, in this space. And so we have to kind of, really lean into that trust and commitment.
And in some ways, it seems like because monogamy is the default setting, it comes with all of the infrastructure that allows you to do the things that a society would normally do, like have kids, raise them, break up in not always a nice way, but like there's ways of maintaining, things and whatnot. With non-monogamy, because it just seems like a relationship of invention, not an invented relationship, but that you're having to because you have so much choice in terms of how you relate to each situation. Is everybody equal? Do I have a primary? Do I have two primaries? Whatever you have, you're having to, now that these big life choices, you're having to sort of invent things because there's no rule book. Whereas with, monogamy, there's a rule book. And so of course, you bring your creativity to every relationship, even if it's monogamous. There's just a lot more that has to be invented when you've got, I would assume, and I don't have this written, but like 5 people, and then you have a kid or 2 kids. Especially those kids start to grow up and they have stronger relationships with one or more of the people than have less relationships. So
to be frank, I wish monogamy threw out that rule book because it's not working. It's not working. I do the same with my monogamous clients. I'm like, hey, let's look at your specific values. Let's look at what's important to you. Let's look at how you're going to navigate these awkward and difficult experiences, because that happens in monogamy too, right? And it just doesn't. We try to illusion ourselves into believing that it's much more secure when it actually isn't.
It's interesting how you talked about elasticity and creativity as ways of repairing problems within relationships. How should someone think about that?
Again, this has to be true of every dynamic. Like, let's kind of take a look at an individual. No individual is exactly what they're expected to be, right? They have more complicated feelings and perspectives and experiences in their own sense of self and identity than what people would assume of them, right? So you're walking around with all of these assumptions projected onto you. Now you're getting into a relationship with a person who is now adjusting how they perceive you based on getting to know you as an individual, right? That, okay, a man that's not necessarily sticking to strict gender roles doesn't mean that he is gay, doesn't mean that he is this, right? Like, we can actually integrate the complexity of a person and then see that as an evolving space that we choose to participate in as we evolve, right? We want the grace of our own evolution as well. And so what we're doing is we're just adjusting the reality and individualizing it, right? We're taking the information that we know to be true, and instead of assuming that as an accurate thing, just being like, wait, what is this person showing me? What is this person telling me? How do I feel when I'm with this person? Who am I when I'm with this person, right? Like, what comes out of me when this person is in my space as well?
How, it's interesting because, a lot of what I think people interested in traditional relationships bring to, or want to bring, or want to impose on a relationship is this sort of stability. And what I just heard you say is, look, stability, regardless of monogamy or non-monogamy, is an illusion because people are dynamic. They're always changing. How should one think about, or how should one empower themselves to honor that sort of, be able to process that sort of like evolution of that person without it sort of, upsetting.
Feeling like a threat?
feeling like a threat or feeling like, well, I got into this relationship and now this person was like different and like, I'm not sure this fits, or I don't know how I feel about this, or maybe I don't have strong enough boundaries, or, like, I think it could be really unnerving, especially if someone is coming from a monogamous relationship where it's like, okay, this is who we are, we're done.
Right. So the first thing is like everything that has stability needs maintenance, right? I have a house. This house has a foundation. It has a strong structure. But if I don't maintain that structure, it'll collapse, and it might collapse slowly. It might collapse after I leave, I don't know. But that doesn't change the fact that I have to maintain it if I want that stability to exist. And I think that most people think like, oh, I'm going to do this stable thing. And then that's, like they don't consider that. But so that's one thing, is just like the reality of stability is that it requires effort and maintenance, like it just does. The other thing about this is that, like, do you want to stay exactly the same all the time? Don't you want to feel like you have room to grow? So why would you hinder that of yourself or of anybody else? Right?
Do you get this sense that people, I think this is a bigger question, honestly, we're not adding this one, but, I have, it's interesting because a number of my friends, there is a sense of like, I want to be stable, like, and I am who I am now, and I'm good with that. And I'm like, for me, that's not something that I process well from my personality. Maybe it's ADHD, but like, I'm like, well, no, you're always changing. We should always be changing. Let's be pushing the boundaries. Let's like, and there's a sense of like, no, this is good. It took a lot of work to get to where I am. Like, I just want a situation where like it's stable, and that never makes sense to do. But I am curious how you've experienced that in your practice, or if you have. Maybe I'm just uniquely weird.
Yeah, no, I actually have a lot of that. This idea of like, we just want something to be stable, right? Like at the end of the day, you also like you're not in control of anything, right? You're only in control of yourself. So like, look who's president. What are the changes that he's implementing? How is that changing the economy, the world around you? Like that has nothing to do with your partner. It doesn't have anything to do with you, but it's still a change that you're going to have to deal with. Right? Like, what stability do you have when the entire world is changing, right? Like, you just dealt with wildfires, right? Like, all of LA is going to be completely different for a very long time. And whatever normal is going to be a new normal. It's never going to go back to what it was. And then having children is a change that people are inviting into their lives and can never anticipate the degree to which all of that is changing. And yet they're doing it. So it's like, how are you going to work with change as opposed to how are you going to fight it? And the thing about people reaching some sense of stability, it's not about never changing. It's about honoring, like, I got to this space of peace because I haven't been there for so long. And when this space of peace is no longer peaceful, that's when I'll shift. That's when I'll move. And, I would ask the person that's always the changing, right? That ABC kind of mechanism, which is great for businesses, right? I would ask that person, well, what happens when you're still, right? What happens when you're not changing? What happens when you're trying to change and something isn't working, and there isn't a change happening? How does that interact with you, right? Like, is there something that you might be avoiding by distracting with change, right? Everybody's different, so I can't say this specifically about you. I don't know you well enough to even put you on blast like that. But I do see that in my practice as well. I'll see people who are just like, I need things to be better. I need to feel better. I need something different all the time. And it's just like, well, what about what is? What does that feel like for you? Which again is why when my clients hesitate on change, I don't push them. Not that that's even appropriate, but I don't perceive that as a lack of progress because that hesitation is important. That hesitation tells me something about them. That hesitation is putting something out in the open. that they haven't maybe even acknowledged before or noticed yet. So everything has a purpose. We have to choose to see it.
We've talked about a lot of the sort of dynamic aspects and maybe some of the less pleasant aspects of life, and in some cases non-monogamy. What for you are the big benefits that someone considering non-monogamy or maybe a little afraid of it? What do you love about it first thing?
Well, to be honest, I want somebody who is curious about it to be a little afraid about it. I don't want somebody to be like, this is great, let me do this. Like, there's so much responsibility associated with being non-monogamous because you have to constantly look at yourself. You have to ask yourself how you're feeling. You have to observe things, right? You have to observe. Like, I was fascinated by the reality that I have a different attachment style to each of my partners.
Interesting.
Right? The way that we talk about attachment, it's like this thing that you carry with you. And it didn't occur to anybody that there's a possibility that different people will bring different things out of you and you're going to respond to them. With some of my partners, I have a little bit of avoidance. Can I call it out? Yeah. Can I move past it? Yeah. But do I realize that I'm being avoidant? Yeah. That's my approach. With others, I'm pretty secure and I'm willing to just say all the things out loud. And it all has to do with that interaction. Our dynamics are very specific and individual, right? And so, that's kind of my favorite part. I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by myself. I'm fascinated by other people. I'm fascinated about, my own hurt, my own emotional pain. I'm not afraid of it. And, they say that grief is the cost of love. I can love somebody, I can lose them in any capacity, and I can hurt. I'll hurt, and that's okay. I'm not dying. I'm not devastated. I can get myself to okay. And so I get to see myself as a person who faces adversity with fun and fascination. I adore that. And each person has to ask themselves how they feel about adversity. If you don't like it, polyamory is the last place you need to be because there's so much of it all the time. If you're not fascinated by yourself, this might not be for you because you're going to want to prove yourself to a lot of people. And it might result in some pretty shitty behavior, right? Like we've seen the harems. We've seen the polysaturation, right? People dating.
What a part.
So a harem is a harem, right? A harem is a guy collecting women, right? And we've seen like women wanting to participate in that until they're like, wait a minute, what is going on? This isn't feeling right. Polysaturation is when you have too many partners, that you got drunk on the experience, you collected too many people in your life, and you didn't consider the time and energy that it takes to invest in those dynamics, right? Polyamory is an orgy. An orgy is an orgy. You want that, go to an orgy, go to a consistent one where you make all of your fuck friends, and that's great. That's fun. Everybody's in on the same thing. Right?
Go to orgy.
But if you aren't looking to be in a relationship, invest time, energy, and effort into several relationships, then this isn't for you. Sometimes we need to make the mistakes in order to understand where we need to go, and that's fine too. Be accountable to that, right? I bit off more than I can chew. Like, I got excited by way too many people, and I think I need to scale back, and I'm sorry that I did that. Right? That's an okay thing to do.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, go into it with open eyes, understand that it can be sort of a bit addictive, but that the benefits are sort of novel experiences with more people than one. Is that correct, or am I?
I mean, the novelty is definitely what's very attractive about non-monogamy, but it's also how you maintain novelty with the same people, right? I have 4 people that I see consistently for years. The shortest dynamic is 5 years, right? And I'm constantly interested in what is coming up because, again, they're changing too. Their lives are evolving as well. some through tragedy, some through life experiences that are overwhelming, right? I had a partner that when we started dating, he had no kids. He was married, he had no kids. Now he has 2 kids that are 18 months apart, and it's busy and hectic, and like it turns everything all over the place, right? His life changed. It changed for the better, proverbially, right? Some people might be like, no, that's a lot. Some people might be like, that's awesome. And so how do I stick around in that? How do I show up? How do I want to show up for that, right? I don't necessarily want to show up as their auntie, right? His kids don't know me. My kid knows him. His kids don't know me, right? And that's something that I am pretty satisfied with, right? Like, I'm not hurt by that. That doesn't affect me negatively. And it seems to work very well for the dynamic. Might he want more? Well, he needs to talk to me and his wife about it, right? That's kind of what that is. The novelty is what you choose to decide as novelty. The best part about it is the community and the support of a bunch of people who just want to love you and who you want to love. And you get to decide what that looks like for yourself and for other people. And some people, I can still love them and say, hey, we're not good together. Not in any of these dynamics. I still care about you. I still love you. I still want you to succeed. I still want to support you in other ways. But as a romantic partner, this isn't going to work. And you can do that so much easier in polyamory than in monogamy, because polyamorous people are like, that's cool. That's fine. It hurts, but it's fine. I'll have the support.
You think in your experience that polyamorous people are more okay with sort of the elastic nature of a relationship, so they're more willing to have those discussions versus a monogamous couple who's maybe like less flexible? Or how would you characterize that?
I would say somebody who's been practicing polyamory for a long time, yes, is likely and when I say successfully, I mean like they've had strong, healthy dynamics and have been able to communicate what they need, right? Like just like any relationship, a strong polyamorous relationship includes people who can handle being in pain, can handle being sad without adding a biting or negative or tense energy to that, without turning their former partner into a villain, just because they're hurt, right? Like, that is also what a mature monogamous person would do as well, right? But the reason we see it less in monogamy is because, one, more monogamous people than polyamorous people. And the second reason is because the assumptions. Everybody actually has slightly different assumptions about what is a good relationship in monogamy that isn't spoken about because everything else seems to fit. But in polyamory, you have to ask those questions. You just have to. You have to be like, do you want children? Like, how would you be as a parent and a partner? Do you want to maintain an open dynamic, right? When you are a parent, if that's what you want. We talk about sex in ways that most monogamous people don't talk about sex. We've been talking about sex. In 2009, there was a study that showed that polyamorous people have a lower incidence and prevalence of sexually transmitted infections than monogamous people. But they're having more sex. Like, this is when STIs were just climbing because we had some really good medications for HIV. The HPV vaccine has been out for a bit, right? Like, people were being less careful. People are using condoms less, right? And so to see that polyamorous people had fewer incidence and prevalence of STIs, it's because they talk about it and they get tested.
I guess is what you're saying.
Whereas monogamous people were not. It was uncomfortable. It was a weird conversation. And I don't envy the younger Rachel who tried dating monogamously and would say, hey, before we have sex, have you ever been tested? And then they're like, ew, what kind of slut are you? It's like, I'm the kind of slut who fucks, and I hope that you do too. So can you tell me if you're like taking care of yourself?
You and I have that in common because I ask every partner that. And when they don't do that, I'm sort of like, I've had 2 people that have been very resistant or somewhat shady, and that has either ended the relationship or ended my commitment to I've pulled back basically from that relationship.
Exactly. So it's the conversations, because we don't have structure, because everything is so, what does this person want? What do I want? How do we navigate this? What are we going to do about it? We're going to have a little less of the inability to recover. Doesn't mean that we don't have hurt and pain. It just means that we understand it differently. It lives differently within us. We don't say, what did I do wrong? We don't say that person's a villain. What is wrong with me? We don't have that as much. Not to say that it doesn't exist. It's just we don't have it as much. We don't question ourselves over a breakup the same way. Again, those that have been doing this maturely for a long time.
I would also guess that it attracts a certain type of person that's maybe a little bit more comfortable with talking about sex, maybe more interested in talking about sex. More in creative sort of types of relationships, so they're less sort of.
It definitely used to. I think now a lot of people are like, I'm polyamorous until I'm not, which is a whole other issue with the space right now. But yeah, in general, like if you're entering a sex positive space, you're going to be surrounded by people who are going to talk about it. So even if you're not comfortable, you're eventually going to get there because everyone else is having that conversation.
Interesting. So for someone who's, I'm guessing people who watch this, obviously we've talked about people who are sort of well into it. So you've given them good advice and helped them sort of rethink maybe how they address their own relationship. But for people who are watching this, who are considering it, obviously you painted the picture of a lot of work, but how would someone, who's maybe the young Rachel, how is someone who is coming to this for the first time or considering, how should they be thinking about it? And how should they get themselves excited about it? Because obviously they're curious, but at the same time, realistic. How could they go into it with eyes wide open?
Understand that it doesn't matter how open your eyes are, things are going to happen. That's the first thing. I don't care how much you've read, how much you've worked on yourself. There's still other people in this story.
So you're saying reading The Ethical Slut once is not enough?
Well, it's a start, right? So it's just this, okay, I'm doing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy training, and I've done all of what is needed to get certified. And so they're like, okay, Rachel, send clients into this process. I'm like, fuck no. And they're like, why? I'm like, I don't feel yet that I have command over this experience. I want to have it first, right? So that I can understand the roadblocks from the person who's going through this process, right? Like I went to therapy before I became a therapist, right? I need to understand what it's like to evolve through something like this, right? And they were like, we like that, right? It's not that I think it's a bad idea. I just think that I'm not ready to step into that because I want to feel a little bit more secure. I can't anticipate all the disasters. And that's what I think it is. I think people enter polyamory thinking, if I just deal with my self-esteem and jealousy, I'll be ready for this. And the reality is, no, you won't, because your whole focus is your jealousy and your self-esteem and not building a dynamic with another person. Jealousy and self-esteem issues are going to pop up at any point. I am a fairly confident and self-assured person, and I've been like this for a long time. It's not just because I'm 40 years old. Like, I've been like this for a while. And every so often, I'm going to be like, oh, I'm feeling really weird right now. Like, I'm starting to ask myself some questions. I don't get scared of my insecurity. I think that's what this is all about. I think people are like, let me stop any potential bad thing from happening. That is the way for all the bad things to happen. You can't avoid anything.
The instinct to sort of bubble tape the world is a dangerous sort of perspective.
Right. And then thinking that it's a utopia. It's far from it. It's not a utopia.
You paint a great picture, like what are the benefits? You're like, let me tell you about why it's not a utopia.
Well, because nothing is, right? Like, it's not a utopia, but it's something that, like, you get to decide to do. It's an option that you have, and you can try out and see how you feel in it. Like, stop trying to seek the disasters and start trying to challenge yourself into what you can be in a relationship, right? See how you love people, right? That is what's exciting. Who can I love?
Right.
What are my options now?
How might someone explore that? That's interesting.
Okay, so in monogamy, we often, right, like the measure of success of monogamy is when one of you dies, right? Till death do us part, right? A breakup is considered a failure.
I didn't know that killing the other person was the goal, but I'm glad quitting my parents for marriage.
Right, exactly. That's how that goes. Yeah, so we consider breakups a failure in monogamy. I happen to not. I think that when we break up with somebody, what we choose to learn from that experience is what is a success, right? Nothing is a failure unless you decide that it is, right? Unless you shoot it down and say, I'm never doing this again, or I'm always going to look for somebody like that and stay away from them, because that person's going to sneak back into your life in a different way that you didn't expect, right? So, like, the idea of success in polyamory is, how do you put effort into things? How are you, like, you have so much more power and control in how you exist in this space. You're no longer waiting for someone else to determine what success is or to define milestones. You get to define milestones. My favorite milestone in this polyamorous couple that I was working with, like, I was just seeing the couple. They had other partners, and it was a non-hierarchical system, was when one of them was the first to fart. That was their milestone. They were like, look, we're not getting married. We're not getting engaged. We're not going to move in with each other. They were solo polyamorous. Like, none of that is real. So the first, like, sign of true, like, undignified vulnerability was farting, and that was their milestone. Like, neither of them had pooped in each other's spaces yet. So I guess it was the fart that, led to the next one.
When I desecrated the other person's toilet.
Well, I mean, isn't that the point of the toilet? How is it desecration if that's what it's meant to be?
It's a throne. You're supposed to sit on it and just be glorious.
I think, I don't know, as a Jew, excreting all of that is glorious. We have an actual prayer to thank God that we poop.
I would like to enact that prayer. As an Irish Catholic Russian Jew who identifies as a cashew,
Yeah.
we don't think the same.
Yeah, I understand. This is why
half-breeds don't see it that way.
Well, that's a choice.
100%.
Right, but again, that's a choice. Do you want to feel liberated in the fact that you were human and what it takes to be a human being, or do you want to feel shamed? Like, that's your choice. It doesn't mean that it's so cut and dry, but you can choose to feel liberated. You can lean into that experience and be proud of yourself because you took care of yourself enough to allow your body to function so excellently.
I like to brag about mine, so I understand.
Yeah.
Obviously, sex is a complex part of this. How should one think about that? Because obviously you have this dynamic, jealousy can create. What are the opportunities and what are the pitfalls when it comes to sort of sex? Because I think that's where everybody goes, and you sort of painted a much larger picture.
So when it comes to sex, we must understand that relationships are not parallel to each other, but they're also not utilitarian. So what this means is, like, if I'm married to somebody and I realize that I'm kinky, and now I get a partner and I'm dating that partner and I have a relationship with that partner, but that partner is my kink partner. And now I don't feel like I could do kink with my primary partner because I have a kink partner already. Like, that's not how this works. Sex is not utilitarian. Sex is part of connection. Sex is part of intimacy, and sex has its own meaning to each person, right? And not always the same meaning to each person who's having sex with each other, right? Some people feel different things and are experiencing different things when it comes to sex with different people. So the first thing is, hey, you want to be a little kinky with your partner who's kinky with somebody else? You can be jealous. You could also have a conversation and say, hey, I feel some feels about you not wanting to play like that with me. And you might even agree with the reasons, right? That partner's like, hey, I feel awkward, having a power dynamic scene with you because I just feel you differently in my life, in my body, and in sex. And so it just never even occurred to me to play like that with you. And I don't know how I feel about doing that. What an excellent conversation. It's not a rejection, which a lot of people will feel when they're feeling jealous or scared to bring up what they're worried about. It is actually a very real, honest understanding of how sex is being experienced with each person and an acceptance of that, right? And a way to explore things together. And again, this is where creativity comes in. Maybe we're not playing with the power dynamic, but maybe we can play in other ways, right? Maybe we could do something else that is kinky without the power structure involved in there, right?
How do you structure these? A lot of what I've heard you say is the communication, and this is, obviously, it wouldn't be a relationship conversation without having a conversation about conversation, but how do you structure how would you advise people having those conversations? Because it seems that's at the core of all the elasticity that makes non-monogamy possible.
So I think it depends on the dynamic. For example, with the partner that I'm more avoidant with, I can be avoidant forever, even when I'm just at my wit's end. So we have a regular check-in, we have depends also how often I see them and whenever. So I will have a time that makes sense, a conversation to be like, how are things going? This is hard. Let's talk about it. And we share the discomfort together. And we're in that as a team. We're about to say difficult things and they're difficult because we love this person, but it's a hard thing to say. And that person understands that what is coming out of the person that you love's mouth is going to be difficult and hard for them to say because they love you. And vice versa, right? That mutual trust of that love and desire to be compassionate with your honesty, right? No brutal honesty in these relationships. So when it comes to avoidance, if we have an avoidant tendency or even an anxious tendency, having a set time, right, will make it very easy, right, to say, this is when we're having this conversation. This is where we can brace ourselves. We put limits on that conversation because it could go on for hours, especially if you have ADHD and so does the other person, which almost all of my partners do. So it tracks. It makes so much sense. We're likelier to accept each other's quirks than a non-ADHD person who's like, why you have cups everywhere? I'm like, listen, I can't deal with that. I can't. I just need you to accept that there's cups everywhere. So stuff like that. For somebody who's anxious, right, that set conversation helps them kind of, work their way through their anxiety to say, hey, this person is invested in having a conversation about the relationship. This isn't like, hey, this is a thing that upset me. This isn't a momentary thing. This is a general relationship conversation. It's not an incident conversation. So it's really understanding, what actually works for you as a person. And, again, leaning into that trust, leaning into that love, even when it's hard. And that's how I often structure it. Again, some relationships, people, they're more willing, they're more open, they have a little bit more security between them. So they're able to say the thing at any point, and it's not going to feel like an assault. It's not going to feel threatening. It's going to be like, oh, I can think about this for a little bit. They can hear it in any age or stage of the dynamic.
Look, we're trying to understand this from the lens of somebody who's maybe considering polyamory, or even somebody who lives there. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like part of what makes these conversations work is that the person receiving the conversation, and obviously it's a conversation, so they're both receiving it, but has to, on some level, assume the best about the person who's about their partner, which seems like it should be like a default setting. But in my experience, it hasn't been. Not for me, but from others. But that is sort of what you have to bring to that conversation, at the very least, for this to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Assuming best intentions is at the core. Having conversations when it's not urgent. Urgency is going to make us the worst version of ourselves. So if we wait until we are at our wits' ends, we're not going to be as compassionate or as kind in that conversation as we could be. We're going to feel the weight of that urgency, and that's going to show up, and it's going to be read by our partners that way as well, right? It's like, hey, like, the way you said that was mean. Like, I understand you said something that was hard, but you actually didn't need to be mean about it, right? That part, so, and the Relationship Anarchy Manifesto has a series. It's less than 3 pages, but it has a series of principles that actually address this. It addresses that we are all autonomous, self-determinate human beings who are evolving, and we need to prioritize someone else's evolution and autonomy just as much as our own. And that has to be mutual in that kind of dynamic, right? Sometimes it's not mutual. And this is, I think, what people are afraid of. I think very big general rule, men are afraid to be jealous. Men are afraid that they're going to have a lot of jealousy. And women are afraid of being abused, right? They're afraid that the men in their lives are going to be harmful or neglectful of them. And they're going to be like assuming best intentions and enduring somebody who's making a fool of them, right? Like, that is a generalization that I see a lot. Obviously, there are exceptions. Obviously, this is not cut and dry, right? Like, I want to be very, very clear. There's a lot of nuance in this, but this is like the general, like, what I get in my practice and what I see in poly spaces. So when I'm talking to these women who are afraid that they're going to get abused and they're going to assume best intentions in that person, I'm going to say, okay, what other effort are you seeing in the relationship? Do you see an effort from that person? Do you see that person like actually showing up to things? And maybe they just don't understand yet how to communicate in a way that is compassionate, or they don't understand boundaries yet. Is that what that is?
Understands.
And that's assuming that they understand it as well. But that's why that conversation is important, because that will reveal that. Well, maybe I don't understand boundaries. Maybe I don't understand how to put effort in the relationship. What am I bringing into this, and what am I not bringing into this that is existing in this dynamic? No, of course, abuse is abuse. And, it's very hard sometimes for the person who's experiencing abuse to identify it, to see it, right? I get that. And in therapy, it's sometimes really hard to say that out loud. But there are going to be some very clear boundaries of like the final line. And then there's going to be like, you're getting too close to the line boundaries. Those are the ones that we start looking at. And that's what I hope for people to look at, to discuss, including the partners that are afraid to be jealous. Well, what are your boundaries? Are they reasonable? Do they make sense? What are the expectations? How will those boundaries evolve if they need to be evolving, right? That is stuff that you get to ask yourself before, you could ask it at any point. And then when you meet somebody, you say, wait a minute, I think with this person, I don't really need this thing over here, right? Like, I had somebody who had like, I don't want my partner to bring their partner, like to bring their other partner into our apartment. But then they started dating somebody who lived in another city, like an hour away. And they were like, I don't need that rule with them because when they're here with me. Like, and then wait a minute. If my partner can't have a partner in the apartment, I can't have a partner in the apartment. Does it work the same way? Does it need to be parallel? Right? How do we work this out? And, like all of those things are questions that one would ask. That again.
It seems to continue to go back to that question and a lot of invention. Like there's a lot of meta work on the relationship that's sort of presumed in monogamous relationship or has already been established.
I don't think it has ever been established.
But I think I think it's fair to say, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but I think it's fair to say that like, and it doesn't work for everybody. That's why, people go to couples therapy and polyamory, but like there are some presumptions that like you can somewhat lean into or make assumptions about. They may not be good ones all the time, but like you can at least sort of lean into them. Whereas it seems like the act of polyamory or non-monogamy, maybe you'll tell me that those two things are different. I think you actually did once. But it's constant invention. It's constant creativity. It's arts and crafts for relationships.
I mean, that's a really fun way to look at it. I don't hate it, honestly. I love the idea of just being like, let me get better at this craft. Right? It's developing that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think there's one thing that, you see in as someone who's fascinated by relationships and oftentimes kind of disgusted by what he sees in the media, pretty regularly. There's a lot of sort of talk about, the red pill community and sort of toxic masculinity. And I would argue that there's also toxic femininity and toxic sort of like everything. But there is a sense amongst men in a certain group of men, and I think this is played out with a certain group of women that sort of are attracted to that, is that there's, the alpha, and we go for the alpha. And so you talked about how do you recognize sort of someone who's a good partner or someone who's wanting to sort of connect with you or have the type of relationship you want and coming to that. And yet there are people who are sort of attracted to someone who will sort of belittle, not necessarily belittle them, object, in a way that say like a BDSM scene would belittle them. But kind of, I need an alpha. You see this sometimes on dating. Right? I need an alpha male. Okay, well, what is that? I interpret what you've just said is that being kind of not conducive to a healthy, and I would argue it's not a healthy relationship, but not conducive to sort of a polyamorous sort of situation. And yet, I think there's a lot of people who are in that, who are attracted to it.
Yeah. I know that people don't like to hear this, but sometimes there are women that want to be in that harem. They want to be one of many with one man who's telling them, this is how we're fucking. This is how you're dressing when you're with me. This is me being in control. And by the way, that alpha in polyamory is not necessarily controlling of any other relationship, right? So you could have a woman who has a partner who is not that alpha, right? Like maybe even the opposite of that alpha, who's got that softness, that gentleness, maybe even an androgynous element to them, right? Where their gender roles are a little bit more fluid and fungible. And so that alpha male is bringing out a different thing that they want. And like, again, that's the benefit of polyamory. You're not fulfilling as much of what one person wants, and they're not fulfilling as much of what you want. There's flexibility here. You can look at relationships differently. There are plenty partners. I have a few partners that I would never be able to be a full-time partner with. And that's not actually a mean thing to say. I love you so much that I know how to love you. I know how to be in love with you. And if we tried to change this dynamic around, it would make it harder. And it would bring other things into our relationship that won't work for either of us. And here I get to see you in this awesome way, in the way that you're presenting to me without changing that, right? Unless you want to and unless I want to. So every so often, there's going to be a woman who says, hey, I want a little something different every once in a while. And it's going to be that guy. And, it fulfills a fantasy. And again, like, we could judge it. And I understand that we can judge it. And I'm not going to say that there isn't a world where I hadn't judged it. There is. And does it mean that they're safe? Nothing is safe. Because like I said, I've seen the most liberal, open-minded men actually be quite abusive and narcissistic. So there is nothing that actually defines safety. And I've actually seen these alpha men who have that harem be exactly what that woman wants, for that window of time, for that moment. And he's cool with that. He's like, listen, I don't need to be their one and only. I don't need to be whatever. I just get to be that wild adventure that they have. And then he has his own, right, other side of himself that he gets to explore with a different partner, right? Like, we can sometimes just look at it as, like, this is something that is wanted. We live in that context. So why wouldn't somebody fetishize that or fantasize about it?
I would say that in general, my conservative friends who are better husbands than my liberal friends.
Yeah, I've seen that. Unfortunately,
they're more, and their wives tend to be happier, and so I'm curious, how does or can, in your opinion, can a sort of more traditional, as it's being reestablished now, prior to the election in a lot of sort of more conservative media, but also, obviously now sort of probably accelerated by the election. Can a sort of more traditional gender role relationship exist also as a polyamorous relationship? And how does that work when you've got like breadwinner, home, and maybe not even homemaker, but like, more traditional sort of roles?
Yeah. I mean, it can. I've seen it, I've seen it work that way where sex is an activity that this couple is engaging in, as also outside of just the two of them. So like they're kind of interacting with sex as like, oh, this is us going out dancing, and like we actually have context for this, in the 70s, we had all of those swing parties. Many of those people were very conservative. Like we keep thinking that these were the like people fighting for sexual liberation. They were not. They were not. It wasn't the married people going to key parties who were fighting for sexual liberation. They were very much still imposing the same ideals onto their daughters. Don't dress like that. Wait till you're married to have sex. Like you're going to have children. You got to look this way. You have to be a woman. What does this mean? Hide that you have any like humanness about you. Don't let people know when you have your period. We don't talk about it. You were probably traumatized the first time you got it because we don't talk about it. Right? Some of those people were the kids of those parents, and that was actually part of their anger. But it's like, but Joe, you were having sex with all these people outside of your marriage, and you raised me into this like conservative ideology, right? So we have this context. We've seen it. It's been kind of a joke, but it exists, and it happens. So I don't. Again, like I don't perceive it anymore as this like one thing, right? What I mean by it's unfortunate that liberal marriage, like marriages to liberal men, is showing a lot of bad husbands, right? is because in a traditional relationship, this is what they're accepting and they talk about it. That's what's amazing, because we live in a world that makes it a little faux pas to now not be a feminist the way feminism is identified, which is silly to me. But because it's hard to be that woman, especially in places like LA, San Francisco, New York. It's hard to be the woman that wants something a little bit more traditional, right? She has to declare that, and she has to find a man who said, I respect that. She's going to ask him what his relationship is to that, right? So the man, the conservative or traditional man, not the same thing, by the way. The traditional man says, this is my wife. She's amazing. I'm lucky that I get to be married to her. And I want to step up into that relationship. I'm going to do what it takes to love her the way she wants to be loved. And of course, I have my boundaries, and of course, I have my things. And I didn't explore that until we came to couples therapy. And that's fine, because I'm willing to go. Right? And if the liberal man did the same thing, he'd be an excellent husband. And I've seen them too. And it's awesome because they speak about, again, prior to getting married, this is what I hope to be. I want to do this with my career. I want to live this life. I want my autonomy to be respected. I want you to be an autonomous person too. We often talk about what you want from your partner. You know, especially the women who have to always fight for their autonomy. It's like, I'm not going to accept if you don't let me be like this. But often what comes forward is they're autonomous, but the men stop being autonomous because they're so fully like checking themselves for their, like to not be mad at their wife's autonomy. And then it creates an imbalance. And it's a mistake that can be corrected, right? It's a dynamic that evolves into this mess until they say, please go out and make friends. Please have a hobby. Please do this. I want you to have a life too. And sometimes that's less explicit until it is in therapy and it's said out loud.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I find one of the ways to track society is through the profile. I'm obviously a male trying to, well, not obviously, but I'm a male trying to date women. I have tracked over a period of time, because I've gone on and had a relationship to come back on again, whatever. And I will say what I find kind of fascinating is related to what we're talking about now, is the tenor of the profiles, like the tenor of the female profiles. I don't check out the men. I probably should check out my competition, I guess, but it's not interesting to me. But it used to be sort of, well, first of all, it's interesting because you see the pictures that women use, and there's always, it's almost like they all get the memo at the same time. It used to be a few years ago, it was like the yoga pose pictures. And then I think someone was like, girls, this is dumb, or everybody's doing this. Nobody likes this. And then it all changed overnight, and you never saw a single other picture. But you saw a lot of like, and obviously I'm in Los Angeles, but you saw everybody was sort of posting, I'm liberal. And then you started to see this transition. And this is where I sort of was like, how's this election going to play out? Because you started to see more conservatives and more moderates.
Or maybe you started seeing more conservatives and more moderates, right? Because remember, it's an algorithm for you. So unless you viewed other profiles, right, like other people,
I very rarely swipe. So
Yeah.
I do feel like my example was unbiased.
Okay.
Because I wasn't particularly targeting that. But you just see this. I saw, and maybe I'm wrong, but I could have my own biases. But I've started to see more moderates, and I started to see more people say, want alpha male. And you would never, ever see that before. I want you, and it's not universal, but you see a substantial number of people saying, I want this, or indicating in sort of coded language, I want a more traditional type of relationship. I think that's interesting. And I think it's sort of like watching these ebbs and flows. I don't know if you're seeing that in your therapy, but practice.
I mean, again, like I can't generalize my sample, right? Like I can't generalize it because people are coming to me for help, right? Like for various reasons, and other things come out and all of that. I have heard that like dating apps have been quite difficult lately. What I actually find fascinating is how those things have changed in terms of like who's doing what, right? Like I remember there was always like a somewhat salacious photo that was allowed to be mixed into the like, I do yoga and I go out drinking and whatever, but also look at me a little bit sexy, but I can't be too sexy. Otherwise that's all you're going to think about.
Always, this has never changed. It's just sort of evolved how, you're so spot on here. Like, there is always a picture where it's like, let me show you my breasts. But one of the most creative, I'll tell you the most creative I've ever seen was a girl who had a dog, very cute. Let me just be very honest about my sort of weed. If you have a dog in your profile, even if I don't find you attractive, I'm like, I want to meet your dog.
Yeah, I want to meet your dog.
Passionate about animals. So like one of my biggest tragedies to my dating profile was when my dog passed away. But she had this dog sort of propped on her chest, and I was like, that's so creative. You're both shown that you're a dog person, you love dogs, and the paws are literally very creative. 10 out of 10.
Well done. Yeah.
Well done. Bravo.
So, here's what's interesting, right? When you look at profiles of men who are looking for men, right? So my brother will show me profiles and be like, what do you think of this guy? Right? Because we have that kind of relationship. And we'll look at a profile and we'll see this like cute, very sweet, sometimes even professional, sometimes like formal event. And then like all of a sudden ass, like, we're like, I am very interested in sex and I'm also interested in a relationship, and those two are not mutually exclusive. Whereas when women are showing sex, right, men are like, you just are good for fucking, right? And so they can't show both. And so they have to make choices in how they are presenting themselves. And I think that now this like moderate alpha desire, right, is coming on this realization that like people are complicated. Liberal men are not making me any safer. Also like an interesting statistic is that Bernie bros were like in 2016 voted for Trump as a majority. Like, yeah, because it wasn't about progressive values. It was the money, it was the economy that they wanted to be different. And that's Bernie's platform. But his whole platform is about economic inequality. It's not about racism, it's not about sexism, it's not about anything else. It's literally about income inequality, economic inequality, and health inequity in this country. So why wouldn't somebody who follows that guy not completely pivot when Hillary Clinton is the other option, right? Because they're not actually interested in anything else, right? Or, whatever else they're like perceiving Hillary Clinton's politics to be. So a moderate is often less, and again, this is a stereotype and it's not true, but a person who's going to say that they have moderate values is probably not going to be as judgy, not as radical, not having to prove themselves all the time. And I think by the time a woman reaches her 40s, she's tired of that game, of that like competition of like needing to do this. But like there is no balance yet. We're still trying to figure that out. And I don't think that we can while our world is all messy. So figure yourself out first, which is going to be true of every relationship. Figure yourself out first.
I think, the push to moderate, like, again, obviously my sample size might be biased and it is just a dating site. So by definition, it's systemically biased. But I do think that moderate is sort of representative of a complexity of what it means to be various things. Like maybe the left and the right have sort of moved in different directions. I don't entirely know. Neither one sort of represent me. I have values here, values over here. So like, if I have to choose one thing, like with voting, we get two options in America. Here, I get three options, or I just don't put anything. I don't put anything because my political views are more
complicated.
Yeah, they're not.
and nuanced.
It's not a binary. It's not a binary spectrum. But one of the things, and I don't want to compliment you, even though that can't be done enough, in my opinion.
Thank you.
One of the things that I absolutely love about you is that in addition to your deep knowledge and respect for the complexity of, like, I've tried to hold you up to it. Well, can you just tell me what's awesome about polyamory? And you're like, well, let me tell you all this other stuff, which is I love that. But you're also a philosopher. And one of the things that like got me excited about our conversation initially is you talked about these sort of 4 existential questions as relates to relationships, polyamory, and obviously life in general, since they're existential questions. Can you, and this is the world's worst setup, so I apologize for that.
Sure.
But so I'm not a very deniable partner. But would you sort of like talk about those? Because I think people just be fascinated about them.
Sure. And it relates so much into our relationships. So existential, kind of like, it's called existential phenomenology, right? So it is the practice and psychotherapeutic approach to existential philosophy. And at the core, they believe that all anxiety and all depression is an existential confrontation. And the way that's broken down is by recognizing that, like we have these 4 premises that we are confronting in different ways. The first thing is that we're mortal. We're going to die. Everyone we know is going to die. We don't know when that's going to happen. It's just an objective truth. And the thing about mortality is that change is another reminder of our like specific mortality, because a part of what we know to be real is no longer real. It's kind of dead in that way. Even though it's still a part of us, it's gone now. So change is an existential confrontation, which is why, right, you're going to have some people who are going to hesitate and some people who are going to move right into that and say, I need to get to the other side of this because it's so hard and I just don't want to deal with this transition, right? And that's usually what makes people hesitate. The adjustment of it all, the questions of themselves that come up when things are different. The next thing is freedom and responsibility, right? There are way more options than we care to admit. And we have the freedom to choose all of that, but we're also responsible for what comes of those choices, of those options. And not making a decision is a decision. But also, you always have a choice. The choices aren't always awesome, right? So this idea, I forgot which philosopher said it, you can stand on the edge of a cliff and have your feet hanging off the edge and you still have a choice which direction to move in, right? The implication is if you're walking forward, you're dying. And if you turn around and you say, well, I didn't have a choice. Well, you did. You chose to live. And that's a really important thing to acknowledge. You had this choice and this is the choice you made. Don't walk around like the world is not giving you options. They could be shitty options, but they're still options. And you have to use your values to understand what choices you're going to make. And my favorite is meaninglessness. I love asking the meaning of things. When I was younger, when I was like 16 and I was getting all into like existential philosophy, because of course that's who I was, right? People thought that I was like full of chutzpah when I would ask like, well, why? Why do we do this? What does that mean? I don't understand it. And I genuinely didn't understand it, but they thought that I was being edgy, but the reality is, it's like, what is the meaning of this? What does it mean for you to be in a non-monogamous dynamic? What is it fulfilling for you? What did you think it was going to fulfill for you that it didn't? What are you okay with? What are you not okay with? And it's okay to say, I'm not okay with a lot of this, but I still want to do it, right? Meaning is asking us to question what we inherited from somebody else, and if we accept that premise, and also, again, our values, right? meaning is very much relying on our values. If I don't value something, the meaning of that thing is much less to me, right? Like, I don't value protectiveness. I don't want somebody to want to protect me all the time. And if that's what is most important to them, I'm going to feel like I can't move the way that I need to. I'm not interested in being someone's protector as much as I don't want to be protected, because I can't live that way. I need somebody to be a little bit more curious about me. So for somebody, being protective or being protected is really important, right? I can't say to them, no, you're wrong, right? No, the meaning of that is so important to that person. It's integral to their self and their concept of self and how they live in the world. And so much of their life existed with that, right? I can't tell them that they're wrong for that. I just don't share the same meaning.
And so this is interesting because the concept of protection is obviously something a little bit near and dear to my heart, because I'm programmed to be protective at the factory.
Yeah.
But I think also I am someone who really celebrates someone else's autonomy. So I'm not protective. I'm like, what if we're being robbed? If you and I were walking down Broadway and someone robbed you, I'd be like, I wonder if you.
But that's not being protective. That's not like a core concept of interaction.
Yeah, right. You wonder for me if it's like, how are you defined? And not that. Obviously, that's a specific thing we could get into and we'd resolve.
But that's exactly the question you ask that person.
That's right.
Right.
Sort of like, how are we defining these various things? Because I'm very fortunate to have been surrounded by at least women, and that's obviously who I want to partner with, who are very autonomous. My grandma was a lawyer until she was 80. They had to literally kick her out. And she got the law degree at 40. I mean, she's a total fucking badass. My mom, nurse, got her master's degree, taught nursing. She's a badass. My step-aunt, who literally ran Hollywood. These are people who you can look at and say, you would both want to, I was both very protective of my mom and very excited that she was, we struggled to get along when I was a teenager, but that's because I was doing dick and, whatever. Just an awful fool. But you both want to protect your mom and you're excited about her. I could both protect my grandma and just be like, let me fucking celebrate the fact that you're destroying deadbeat dads.
Love.
I
want you to know.
Look at and be like, you're amazing. And also your husband died and I want to be there for you if you want me to be.
Yeah. I want you to know that I am a very protective person. My clients will often say that to me, and I will often say to them, I'm just feeling super protective of you right now.
You're like mama. I just smell mama bear on you.
Yeah, I'm total mama bear. And the thing is that because I am so quick to go there, I need my dynamics to not insist on it. Right? This doesn't mean that I never want to be protective. It's not a black and white situation, but I need to not only have space for that when I'm with another person. And I think that's really where it is. It's I'm multifaceted and I need the other parts of myself to show up because I'm so inclined to be mama bear, which by the way, makes me never want to have sex with that person again. Right? Because all I want to do is protect them and I am a mama to them. Right? I can't be with a person who is in need of that identity, right? Sometimes I don't mind being a little protective. That's different. But if this is what is called for me on a regular basis, that's not going to work. So I don't put a lot of meaning for that in my adult relationships, right? The last thing is aloneness versus loneliness. Loneliness is a meaning that we attach to aloneness. And this doesn't mean that it never exists if you're totally fine with yourself. Of course, it does exist. Loneliness is too much aloneness. It's too much isolation. It is a bouncing within yourself, because part of what makes us human isn't just who we are in our aloneness, but also how we interact in the world. And if we're not exercising that, we are lonely, right? The pandemic brought a lot of that out, right? Because people were isolated, and how that showed up in relationships was magnificent. Polyamory was going through a mess at the time because they were like, well, how do we know that it's safe? And what's my responsibility to other people? You can't exactly extend the STI conversation to this. It was slightly easier to a degree, but also a lot of hurt feelings, right? Because it's like, who am I committing to? Can I trust who they're committing to? And a lot of things. And like COVID was very scary, especially in New York when we were regularly walking by trucks filled with corpses, right? And hearing sirens everywhere. So it wasn't something that we were taking so lightly at some point. And it created a lot of pain in relationships. And we needed to ask like the meaning of it. Like, yes, you understand it intellectually, but what is the narrative that is hurting, right? It's like, oh, I don't matter enough to this person to take this risk. And even though intellectually they understand like nobody should take this risk, right? Emotionally, it could still hurt because that's the meaning that is attached to that, and the loneliness that comes out.
Which speaks to your other sort of existential question.
Right. And so those are the four premises that we're often battling one way or another to a degree in our relationships with ourselves, in our life, right? Changing a job, as much as it could be great, it's also terrifying, right? Like I had a client who went in full destruct mode because she got a promotion that she worked for. She knew she was working for it. And then she got it. And she was like, I'm going to go have sex with all of these people that I don't want to have sex with. And I was like, all right, let's center for a second. Have sex, but with who, right? Who's not going to destroy your life right now? Who's not going to be a problem? And of course, she was attracted to her like primary partner's best friends, you know, who was like a no-go, right? And I was like, hey, something is going really great for you. You don't need to destroy yourself, right? Because it was so confronting for her to finally reach something she's been working for so long. Now what? I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. Now what? Right? The maintenance phase of everything is very difficult. Right?
That's happening. So how do you leverage these in your practice, this sort of larger, because I've often felt, and maybe wrongfully so, I've often felt that a lot of psychology that I've seen, not necessarily that I've experienced personally, but a lot of what I see out there, it lacks a larger philosophical sort of structure. It's sort of more like, let me put out fires versus which is near to my heart recently. But
that's crisis.
Yeah, it's more sort of crisis management, even sort of disguised as sort of like this higher purpose. But you actually have this larger philosophy, which is fairly clear. How do you bring this to your practice?
So there are many different approaches that I use, and I use them based on like what's coming up and what I think would be most effective. One of the things that I really enjoyed learning, even though it was associated with an approach that I'm not very attached to, right? So cognitive behavioral therapy is a very well-known type of therapy. It has concrete goals, you know, like all of that stuff. And I think that there's value in that too. It's just not what I practice. And some people had expanded their cognitive behavioral therapy approach with something called acceptance and commitment therapy. And I adore it because it has a little bit of concreteness, but it also like spreads into that existential philosophy really nicely. So it really is like a tangible approach to the philosophical approach, right? And acceptance is acceptance of yourself and of others. But first you have to accept yourself. You have to accept the good, the bad, the ugly, the neutral, the stunning, right? And accepting the stunning about yourself is sometimes harder. I think people are so inclined to be hard on themselves. I was terrible at this. I was like, okay, when did things go well? What did you do well? And they can't even answer those questions, right? So accepting all of these great things about yourself is a part of the work as well. And because the hardest part is accepting yourself, right? Because we believe that we need a little bit of criticism in order to make a change. And that criticism is often disparaging or self-deprecating. And so, like, can you actually really love yourself and then still do what you want to do?
It's
Right?
so funny. This is going to be sort of a pretentious example, but my tennis coach has to sort of, every time I fuck up, and I love it. Like, I'm very hard on myself. He's like, okay, we're going to focus on what you did well. And I think he knows he needs to be that counterbalance, because I'm like Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan in my own head all the time. I'm like, Mike, what the fuck is going on? Why are we fucking with it? But
and they had to get there, though.
What?
They had to fuck up to get to where they were.
Really?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't interrupt
Yeah.
you. Not the acceptance.
Right.
Especially running parts of yourself.
Commitment is the commitment to yourself by understanding your values, which again, right, it goes right into meaning and choice and all of that. And then committing to the change, that understanding that whatever change you're doing is a change that is for you at the core. And like, by the time I was 34, I was so sick. I had a kid and it had affected me quite negatively. And no doctor could tell me what to do. They would always just be like, here, take more medication. And I was so sick of being sick. And I was so exhausted from not being able to be the person that I am, because I was fatigued and foggy all the time, that I started doing ridiculous research, and I was like, I'm just going to try this thing out. So, of course, I went and I did the keto diet, right? Because that's what showed was going to work very well with thyroid disorders. Now, I didn't do the keto diet like we understand. I wasn't having a bacon, egg, and cheese burger, all the time. Like, I've seen people like sandwiching burger patties with all that. I was like, no, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to have a whole lot of vegetables. I'm going to reduce my fructose. I was going to take a very specific approach to this keto experience, except I wasn't going to try to be like, I don't want ketogenesis, right? Like, I don't care about that. It was more like the quality of the food that I was eating and the quantity of it. And it was actually like, even though it was hard, it was easy, because I was able to say, like, I'm going to be here for myself. And part of being here for myself is being here as a mother to my daughter the way that she deserves. Like, for 4 years, she's had this woman who just like couldn't be there for her with the energy that she needs and deserves. And I'm sick of that. And It was my sense of identity and my sense of commitment to the value of being present, of being myself, that made it easy to make those sacrifices, right? To not make the choices that are easy. I mean, bagels in New York, like, they're the best. And I haven't had one in almost 7 years now, right? I haven't had sugar in 7 years. It's a game all the time, but it's one that I'm willing to play for the result, right? So that's the commitment part. And so we're constantly working through that system. The other is internal family systems, right? It's this idea that we're all made up of different parts, and some parts we've been told are unacceptable. So they're exiled. And to keep them in exile, we have protectors. But we have two different kinds of protectors. The ones that make us productive, right? The ones that are critical of us. The ones that, like, push us. The ones that make us research all the time. The ones that make us jump into things, right? Those. The ones that make us feel guilty when we rest, even though we need to. The other protector, and you brought them up unintentionally, are called the firefighters. See, the thing about the firefighter is that when they put out a fire, they don't give a shit about anything else, right? Everything gets destroyed, but the fire is put out. That's all that matters. That's crisis management. And we see this with deep depression, where someone's practically catatonic. We see this with drugs. We see this with eating disorders, right? And often the firefighters are there because the exiled part is the part that wants to harm us, right? Or we believe that. And so using the principles of meaninglessness, of change and mortality helps us understand all of these parts as parts that are always trying for us. That they are, that all what we perceive as a weakness is actually an overused strength, right? A strength that's just exhausted. That the part that's actually really critical of you is a part that has been looking out for you your entire life and knows what you're capable of, right? And I think that when we see that, we can be so compassionate to ourselves if we really give ourselves that chance. And then understanding the meaning of that. Well, what happens when I'm compassionate to myself? Am I going to be a bad person now because there's nobody keeping me down? There's nobody keeping me in check, right? That's that constant flow. And we only understand these things in a dynamic with another person, whether that's a friend, a parent, a child, whatever it is, right? We only can fully perceive ourselves by being perceived as well, right?
I want to end this because
Yes.
on that high note, because one, I stolen too much of your time, and two, that was an amazing sort of crescendo. Thank you so much for your time. You've been so generous. I think
It was such a pleasure.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think people are going to get a huge amount of this. If someone wanted to connect with you, what's the best? We'll put everything on when we post it
On the show notes. Yeah.
But we'll put it on there. But
Yeah, so they can find me on Instagram at the Audacity to Heal. My website is theaudacitytoheal.com. They can send me messages. I have a practice with other therapists that I'm training, and they're all excellent. I love them so much. I really I have more than just a professional dynamic with them. I'm really invested in their success and their careers, and it's been wonderful, right? This is my mama bear energy that I'm giving to my supervisees. I'm just so proud of them. And so, if I can't work with you, they can. And I have full trust in their capabilities. And, I have a beautiful network of people that I had built, again, by sticking to my authenticity and being so stubborn about it. Yeah, I'll take that. I'm very stubborn about myself. And
your mama bear for yourself.
I am. You see, it's needed sometimes.
There you go.
So here we are. Please reach out. I'd love to hear from any of you. Again, through Instagram, through my website, there's a contact form. And this has been fun. This was really fun. You did not steal my time. I'm sharing it with you.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it, and look forward to the next one.
All right. Have a great day.
Heck.